Nobody wakes up one day and decides they've waited too long to downsize. It just kind of happens. And by the time they call me, things are already feeling heavy. Sometimes it's after a fall or a repair that just became too much. That's what I want to talk about today. Not whether to downsize, but what it looks like when the decision gets delayed longer than it should. Because I see it regularly and it tends to show up in ways people weren't expecting. It's rarely one big moment. It's usually a series of smaller things that start adding up quietly over time. The house starts to feel harder to keep up with. Maintenance gets delayed. Not because people don't care, but because it's just a lot to manage. Rooms stop getting used, stairs become more of a consideration, even if nobody wants to say that out loud yet. And then there's the stuff. Years, sometimes decades of things that haven't been sorted through. What could have been done gradually over time now feels like an overwhelming project all at once. And that's usually the point where I get the call. Not at the beginning of the conversation. After things have already started to feel heavy. Sometimes it's the homeowner. Sometimes it's the adult children who are starting to notice the shift before anyone else is ready to talk about it. And the conversation has changed by that point. It's no longer, should we think about downsizing someday? It's become, how fast do we need to figure this out? That's a very different place to be making decisions from. Because now you're not choosing what makes sense for the long term, you're reacting to pressure. And pressure has a way of narrowing your options before you've even had a chance to look at all of them. Maybe the house needs more work than expected before it's ready to list. Maybe the timing in the market isn't ideal, or maybe there's less flexibility in where to go next, simply because the decision wasn't made a little earlier when there was more room to think it through. It could be there's a wait list at where you wanted to go, or someone getting out of the hospital and their home is no longer somewhere they can go. I'm not saying there's a perfect time to downsize. There usually isn't. Life doesn't work that way, and I'm not going to pretend it does. But there is a real difference between making this decision while you still have options and making it once those options have already started to narrow. The people who tend to navigate this best aren't the ones who feel rushed. They're the ones who started the conversation earlier, before it felt urgent, and when they didn't have to make a move right away. Because once you've thought through what the next chapter could actually look like, what you want your home to do for you in that chapter, and how you'd want that transition to happen on your own terms, you're not reacting anymore. You're deciding. And those are two very different things. So if you're starting to feel that shift even just a little, even if it's just showing up as a thought you keep having and then pushing aside, it's probably worth having the conversation now rather than later. Not to rush anything, not to force a decision before you're ready, just to give yourself more room to make a good one. Because the families who feel best about how this transition went almost always say the same thing afterwards. They're glad they started thinking about it when they did. If you haven't watched my video on how to recognize the signs that it might be time to start thinking about downsizing, that's a good place to go next. It picks up right where this one leaves off. And if you're in the San Antonio area and want to talk through what this could look like for your specific situation, I'm always happy to have that conversation. You don't have to have it all figured out. You just want to get clear before the timeline gets decided for you.